Hey, what's going on everybody? It's Richard here again from Crash Course Hobbies. Today we're doing a fun little video about 5 things I wish I knew when I started the hobby. You know, if you're a little bit new, I want to impart some wisdom on you. And if you've been doing this for a while, you might get a kick out of this video too. Let's see how many of our things line up. So with that, let's get to the first one. The first thing I wish I knew when I started Warhammer is that you can paint your miniatures however you want. This is one thing that, you know, there's, especially with like Space Marines, there's a lot of different chapters and all their iconography and everything. If you look in your codex or in the rule book, your Ultramarines, of course, always blue, Blood Angels red, all this kind of stuff. And GW doesn't really come out and just tell you that you can paint your miniatures however you want. There are generally some kind of accepted ways of custom armies being done. For example, like if you're doing Space Marines and you want to paint your Blood Angels purple like mine are, you typically would just paint the entire army the certain color scheme, and you can leave on or off the different like symbols and stuff like that. And then it's just kind of expected that when you go play with somebody, you just explain to them, hey, these are Blood Angels, they're just purple, everything else is the same. The purpose there is just so that your opponent knows what rules you're using, and so it's easy for them to understand. Sometimes where it can get a little bit more confusing is if maybe you painted them all different colors, or you've got, let's say, Iron Hands upgrade parts on your Blood Angels, and you know, when you take it to a tournament or something, a lot of times the reason they use what you see is what you get, or WYSIWYG on your weapons and things like that, is just so that it's less that your opponent mentally has to keep track of. So if they see Iron Hand stuff on your Blood Angels guys, then they might get confused or forget which army you're playing, or something like that. But generally, just remember, it's your toys, you can paint them however you want, and I encourage that. And I think, you know, in the hobby in general, people like to see schemes that aren't the typical box art color scheme. I personally try to always do a custom color scheme whenever possible. It just makes you own your army a little bit more, and that's fun for me. The second piece of advice that I want to give to you guys is that buying new products or better painting products doesn't equal better skill. And what I mean by that is the time you put behind the brush is going to give you way more return than if you were to go and buy the absolute best, considered best paints or best brushes, or fancy new vortex mixer, or a super high-end light or something like that. Nothing is going to replace the brush control, the familiarity with how the paint works, the different techniques, than just sitting down and putting in the work. So while it's still good to sometimes invest in certain things, it's more often than not going to give you a better return than if you just sit your butt down at your desk and start painting. The third one, and is probably the one that I think is the most important here, is that the rule of cool trumps all. The rule of cool means that you pick whatever you think is cool, and that's pretty much it. But let's say you're picking an army and you're not sure if you want to go with Space Marines, or you want to go with Tyranids, or you want to go with Orcs. And so you ask around, and maybe you find out that in the current meta, Orcs are really powerful right now. So you're like, oh, well, that sounds cool, I want to win, but I really like the way Tyranids look better, and you decide to go with Orcs. Well, a little secret here is that Warhammer is constantly changing. The rules are always being updated. They release different facts, they release different chapter approved updates, kind of like a patch for a video game. And so what might be the current super strong army, in a couple of weeks, 6 months, whatever down the line, they might be the worst army. And so picking the models that you think look the coolest, especially for your first faction, is super important, because I'll tell you a secret, you're gonna spend 90%, if not more, of your hobby time at your desk painting these models than you actually are playing with them. So it's really important that you pick one that you think is really cool, because you're gonna spend a lot of time building and painting and looking at these models. And if you compromise for just rules on a page, you're gonna have a way worse time than if you just pick models that you really like. The fourth thing that I wish I knew is how important weather is to priming. Now, we all have to prime our models. It's a crucial step, and having a good, smooth prime job is the foundation for our painting down the line. So if you have a textured, bumpy, or bad prime job, that's gonna show up in your finished product, and so this is really important. And it didn't really know when I started how important it was to make sure that you prime on a warm, dry day, and humidity is gonna be your enemy here. So if it's really humid outside, maybe it just rained, or it rained the day before, or whatever that case might be, you do not want to prime in those wet, humid, kind of gross conditions, because it will really screw up the way your primer adheres to the model. It's not going to dry smoothly, and you don't want to ruin your $30 to $100 plastic model by spraying it with a bad priming job. Now, depending on where you live, this might be a good enough reason to invest in an airbrush, because being able to do it in a climate controlled area is going to give you really good results pretty much all the time. That's what I ended up having to do, and I do recommend doing that if your area kind of permits, or just be patient. And that's another reason to kind of go with the airbrushes. If you build your models, you want to paint them right away, you can prime them anytime, day or shine, you know, rain, whatever. Or like, you know, I was just telling my brother this, he just started getting into the hobby and he really wanted to prime up some of his models, but it was a terrible day for it. So having to wait a few days to get going on your minis can really suck, but I do think it's really worth being patient. And finally, the last thing I wish I knew was just how important it is to pace yourself. Now, when we get into the hobby, we're super excited, and you know, maybe you're not as worried about the money investment, so you pick up a combat patrol, some HQs, a couple vehicles, hell, maybe you get your whole 2,000 points from the get-go. But then you sit down at the desk and realize that assembling and painting 2,000 points is a huge undertaking. And that can be really off-putting for somebody who's newer to the hobby. It could be kind of demoralizing or seem like an insurmountable task. And so I would recommend looking at your model purchases not less in terms of financial investment and in a time investment, because while that $50 squad of guys, it might not be that big of a deal for you personally and for your financial situation. But if you look at it in terms of, this is a 10-hour time investment for me, or 20, or whatever your painting standard kind of requires, then you know, it starts to really make more of an impact, I think, or at least put it into perspective what you're getting yourself into. So if you are newer, I would recommend just going with like a combat patrol, or maybe even a single squad of guys. Build them all, paint them all, and then as a reward for yourself, go out and get the next box, the next thing. Now, we all end up acquiring a pile of shame, pile of opportunity, however you want to look at it, and that's just part of the hobby. But I would be remiss if I didn't at least try and help some of you newer guys avoid that if possible, because you'll get more out of the hobby. It's also, you know, you want to give yourself a bit of gratification or reward as you go into it, instead of just batch painting an entire 2,000 point army. It can be nice to see a bit of results. So I would just say start smaller. As you complete stuff, then move on. And I think you'll be a lot happier with kind of your hobby journey as you go when you get some things done. Anyways, guys, that's it for the 5 things I wish I knew when I started Warhammer. If you're newer into the hobby, I hope these things help you out. And if you've been in the hobby for a while and you have other ideas or bits of wisdom you'd like to help out the newer folks, please leave those in the comments below, because I think it's just gonna help everybody out. And I'd also like to know what you think about mine. Maybe we're on the same page, maybe we're not. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching this one. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, support your local game stores, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.